The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our studio. Trevor Loudon is our guest. He's from New Zealand. He's a writer, speaker, he's an activist, and writing a number of different books. And if nothing else, I guarantee you, call a friend and tell him to listen. He's going to make you think, and I'm sure that many people will get angry, but I let it go from there. It's good to see you again, my friend. Move close to the microphone. It's good to have you back in town.
Look, it's great to be back, Peter, and thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure. When I heard you were going to be here, I said, do not miss. Talk about yourself and your growing up, background, education, and what you believe, and then sort of why you believe it, if you would.
Yeah, look, I grew up as a New Zealand socialist. We thought that it was great that the government gave us everything, health care and free dental and whatever. And it was really only in my late teens that I started to look at a different viewpoint when I was exposed to some great American writers, everybody from Ayn Rand to, I've forgotten their names now, but Henry Hazlitt and people like that. So I learned about economics, I learned about the free market, I learned about the U.S. Constitution, and I sort of saw there was a different way of organizing society and that freedom was actually a viable option. So through my 20s, I was active in New Zealand politics, and I basically became what I am as a researcher on the left. I research communist movements, socialist movements, Marxist movements, and their influence on mainstream policy. And then while I was researching the American situation, I discovered Barack Obama, a young Barack Obama, and the Hawaiian communist Frank Marshall Davis.
There you go. Oh.
And I was blogging a lot about American politics. I exposed a man called Van Jones, who was a green job czar in the White House.
We have an interesting moment with Van Jones here in Colorado with our now mayor, or that was the mayor, now the governor, who denied that he even knew the guy. And we have speeches he's giving, calling Van Jones a rock star, giving Van Jones awards. This is the guy who is the current governor who was going to be challenged, but said he hardly knew Van Jones.
Oh, look, it's amazing how people, disown people when they get unpopular for a while. But Van Jones was a hardcore Maoist. He was a cop hater in San Francisco. He used to agitate against the police all the time.
Yeah.
And Obama made him a green job czar and put him in charge of a multi-billion-dollar budget.
Wasn't he something first and then got exposed and then dropped down one and then dropped down again? And today he's just a freelancer.
Yeah, well, he's on Crossfire now.
Yeah,
right. He's one of the people on that. He's touring the country as a moderate Democrat, promoting his green job scams and that sort of thing. So, yeah, he hasn't changed his stripes. He's just a bit more clever about it now.
Well, according to our governor, he's a rock star.
Well, I'm sure he was a rock star. Valerie Jarrett cooed and ahed over Van Jones, saying how they were watching him in San Francisco for years and had to have him in the White House. Look, if you're a low-level federal government employee, you have to get an FBI security clearance to get a job in the federal government. Yet they were putting a Maoist radical, a total cop hater, a total street agitator into the White House in charge of a multi-billion-dollar budget and calling him a rock star, without any FBI security clearance whatsoever.
Do you think that the President of the United States could get a clearance if he were not the President of the United States?
Look, absolutely not.
I agree.
He couldn't get a clearance to clean the toilets at any military base in your country.
He could not pass E-Verify.
No, not a chance.
Seriously, he could not.
Yeah. So, and that's a pretty serious situation, I would think.
Well, but again, the overlooking of the MSM and the lionizing of people like, you mentioned Valerie Jarrett. Valerie Jarrett may very well be the most powerful person in the White House, maybe even more powerful than Michelle Obama.
Look, I have no doubt about that. I call her Obama's handler.
Yeah, that's good.
And the interesting thing is both her grandfather and her late father-in-law were active in Communist Party circles in Chicago with Frank Marshall Davis, the man who later mentored Obama in Hawaii. And they just happened to work together in the White House later. And the same with David Axelrod. About the other half of Obama's brain, he was mentored by a man, a hardcore communist in Chicago, also with ties back to Frank Marshall Davis. So it's a very incestuous.
Let me ask a question that I don't have an answer for. Of all the places that Barack Obama lived, or we think he lived, when he graduated goes on to Columbia, then on to Yale. On to Harvard.
Harvard, yeah.
Pardon me. And then why, of all the cities in the United States of America, does he go to put down his roots? Chicago. He had never lived in Chicago. He lived in New York. He lived in Indonesia. He lived for a short time in California. And he also, of course, lived in Hawaii. What was the reason for him to go to Chicago?
Well, the reason he states is he was attracted by the election of Harold Washington as mayor of Chicago.
Nonsense.
Well, yeah, but it's interesting. Washington was a big-time supporter of both the Communist Party USA and Democratic Socialists of America. He filled his administration full of Marxists. So that's the reason he gives. He was inspired by the election of a Marxist mayor. But I would say it's because he had a network waiting for him.
I agree.
You know, he had a whole bunch of people who were waiting for the anointed one to turn up so they could work his way through, work him and build him up to some position of influence.
Yeah, I'm starting to believe that because there was Jane Byrne and Harold Washington after Dick Daley Sr. dies. And after they called him Richard the King Daley died.
Yep.
And then there's a dogfight, and Harold Washington comes out of it. And Harold Washington was I believe, a city councilman, was he not?
He was a former congressman, U.S. congressman. I think he may have served on the Chicago City Council.
Yeah. So he knew the ins and outs of the Daley machine.
Yeah.
And Jane Byrne was such a flop. And then Harold Washington. And it was always odd because, of course, Frank Marshall Davis is from Chicago.
Yeah, look, exactly. And he had all his network. Well, it's just amazing, Obama goes to Chicago and he's picked up by people like David Cantor and David Axelrod and Valerie Jarrett, who all had links back to that old Chicago communist machine which Frank Marshall Davis came out of. Obama had a network ready for him.
I believe that.
And they promoted him and worked with him, got him into the Illinois State Senate. They helped to get him elected to the U.S. Senate.
He gets beat. He runs against Bobby Rush, who had been a Panther, I believe.
A Black Panther, long time affiliate with the Communist Party USA.
Yeah, I know he'd been a Panther, and Bobby Rush beat him.
Well, he was a Panther Minister of Defense.
Indeed.
He was jailed on weapons charges, and now he's serving in your Congress.
Yes, but Bobby Rush clipped him.
Yeah, he did.
And then this notion of being a community activist, which is the jacket that his bio gives him. What did he do as a community activist?
Well, in the old days, they used to call them communist agitators.
Or fixers, or whatever you call them.
Fixers, it's someone who works in the local community, builds up, works with the radicals, works with the churches, works with the local Democrat political machine to basically, build up certain elements of the community, to build a power base. That's what it's about.
But what, not that I'm an expert, but I can't find any political cause or anything that he actually accomplished. We're talking about Barack Obama as an organizer. Do you have anything that you can say, gee, he accomplished this?
No, really, it was just a networking exercise. He was building up his own power base in Chicago, getting to know the people he needed to know, the union people and whatever, so he could eventually start his political career.
Trevor, where did he get a paycheck?
Where did he get a paycheck?
Yeah.
Well, I think it was through the Alinsky type people, but it wasn't big.
But when he every 2 weeks when he got a check, whose name was on it?
Well, it would
I've never been told, or I can't read that anywhere.
Yeah, well, I think it was Gamaliel, who are an Alinsky organization.
Okay.
But it wasn't a very big paycheck. But it certainly wasn't enough to save up to go to Harvard. That's for sure.
No, please.
And
by the way, the student loans that they one time talked about, and now they don't talk about anymore. How did he pay for all of that?
Well, look, Obama went to Harvard, and that was arranged by a guy called Donald. Well, the real name was Donald Warden. He was a former Black Panther as well. But at that time, he was working for a Saudi prince.
That's right.
And that was organized also partly by a man called Percy Sutton, Now,
He was an old lawyer. He's a civil rights lawyer.
But he was more than that. He came from a San Antonio, Texas communist family.
Yep.
Most of the members were Communist Party members. Sutton hung around with the Communist Party, served on several of their fronts, and he was the man who wrote a letter recommending that Obama went into Harvard. Incidentally, Percy Sutton was also the man who trained a young lawyer and mentored a young lawyer called Eric Holder. You might have heard of him.
I know that as well.
You know, so this incestuous network of communists and Islamic radicals who have propelled your little Mr. Obama right from the street levels of Chicago right up to the White House, and they've been with him all the time.
He was U.S. Senator for, I believe, 159 days or 156 days when he gets into Iowa, into the caucuses, and he comes out on top over Mrs. Clinton and over John Edwards. What was that about?
Well, this is a suspicion of mine, is that really Obama was going to be floated in 2016 or maybe even 2020, but they put him. He did a great speech at the conference in 2004, and I think the people behind him were thinking, well, look, maybe we can run this guy a bit early. You know, he's catching the Americans. He's catching the attention of the American public. You know, he hasn't really had the time and the training that we'd want, but he's going ahead now, and I think they made the decision to shunt Hillary aside and put Obama in early. And so they got behind him. He got the nomination in 2008, and he did everything he was trained to do. He was charismatic, and he could speak about in vague generalities about hope and change, and he captured the imagination of the American public. And he got that. He beat John McCain, and he got in, and I think he went too far, too fast. And he woke up the Tea Party and the conservative movement. I think really the original plan was to run him in 2016 or 2020. And if they had done that, they might have been more successful, I think.
10 after the hour, 610, 710 KNUS, Denver's talk station. You're listening to, of course, the one and only Trevor Loudon. All of his work and his links are up on our website this morning, 710knus.com, and a number of different things that have happened as well. But you can, because of how powerful he speaks, you can read the excerpts from The Enemies Within and the other works that Trevor's done. It's up on the website, 710knus.com. I'm kind of I don't know how I want to say this, a geek or a buff or of the life of Barack Obama, because it's sealed.
Yeah.
And none of us can see it. I believe that the so-called birth certificate was layered and manufactured and was done in Washington, D.C. The woman who makes the night flight, the commercial night flight that brings this PDF file, this layered PDF file, and his entire life, his credentials, if you would, have been sealed. Why do you believe that they sealed everything up?
I think there's too many embarrassing things in his past. There's who helped to finance him through Harvard, who helped to finance him through even Occidental. You know, he didn't come from a particularly rich family. He didn't have a glowing academic record, but he was able to go from Occidental over to Columbia to get into there. Nobody knows what he did there. The only thing that anybody can find is a big article he wrote for the student newspaper on nuclear disarmament. You know, but there's no great record of people who knew him at Columbia or him standing out in any way. So other than a few allegations that he attended some very radical meetings. So, yeah, there's a whole, look, with someone like George Bush or John McCain, you could find someone who knew him every day of his life.
Oh, sure.
You could trace every single thing he ever did, every party he ever went to, every trip he ever made. But Obama, there's just huge blanks, and I think that's deliberate.
Why would you suppress passport records?
Well, you'd be you'd want to know where the man's travelled to.
Sure.
There could be some very embarrassing places.
Under what name? Under what religion? Under what nationality?
For what purpose?
Yeah.
You know. Well, we know he went to Pakistan when he was
did.
at Occidental. Why does somebody go to Pakistan to go?
I thought he went when he was at Columbia. He roomed with the two Pakistani guys.
No, that was actually Occidental.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Look, the man was only 18, 19 years old.
Right.
So he goes to Pakistan to go partridge hunting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how credible is that?
Yeah, it isn't.
You know, with a couple of Pakistani guys, you know, that he was rooming with.
Mm-hmm.
As a young guy, who paid for that?
Mm-hmm.
Why did he go there? What was the purpose of his travel?
Yeah.
So, and where else has he been? You know, so there's huge gaps that the so-called leader of the free world is just the man who campaigned on openness and transparency has just got locked up.
Reverend Wright, after the falling out, Reverend Wright said that he found a way to blend or meld the Islamic beliefs of Barack Obama into modern Christianity in his church. And he's on record of saying that. What faith do you think Obama is?
Well, he was brought up, yeah, this is a difficult one. He was brought up, obviously, in the Islamic faith as a young man, and that's obviously had a big impression on him. I don't honestly think Obama is particularly religious. I think his main God is himself. But I think he's sympathetic to Islam and the fact that it's anti-American. He's sympathetic to anything anti-American. So he's going to be sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood. He's going to be sympathetic with Islamic revolutionaries in the Middle East because they're opposed to America. And you've never had a more anti-American president than the current one. So I think he's culturally sympathetic to Islam. Whether he actually shares the Islamic faith, I can't tell. But he certainly doesn't share the normal American values or Christian values as they're generally understood in this country.
What do you do with Reverend Wright? You know, they offered him hush money. He's talked about it.
Yeah.
They offered him hush money not to speak anymore. And, of course, Reverend Wright was on the nightly news every night when he was supporting Barack Obama, and now he's totally gone the other way, and you never see Reverend Wright again, do you?
No, he's a non-person now.
Yeah.
You know, Wright was started out as a Muslim himself.
He was a Muslim, that's right.
He went to Libya.
That's right.
You know, and
met Gaddafi, right?
Yeah, met Gaddafi. Yeah. He was a hardcore radical, very associated with the hardcore left. So he goes from radical Islam, meeting Gaddafi, to becoming a Christian pastor. But his Christianity was not what you would find in the churches of Iowa or Kansas.
Agreed.
It was radical liberation theology. It was basically Marxism with a Christian veneer.
That's what liberation is.
That's what liberation theology is.
Sure.
So Obama spent 20 years in a liberation theology church. It was basically a Marxist organization. There were Communist Party members attending that church.
And that's where we're led to believe that's where he met Michelle.
Well, yeah, maybe he did, maybe he didn't.
No, I agree. There's maybe, but we're told that that's where he met Michelle.
Yeah, and that way be the case. You know, Michelle has her own radical background. You know, when she was at Harvard, she used to hang around with some very, very radical elements. And I don't think her contempt of American values are a great secret. You know, she's openly expressed she was not particularly proud of her country.
First time she was ever proud of her country.
Yeah.
Was when he was nominated.
Yeah. So, you know, the two, if that is true, they met together in a Marxist church. You know, so the president and the first lady met together in a Marxist church with hugely anti-American values.
You can hear Wright's sermons.
Yeah,
he damns America.
KKK America.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
You know, and so but Obama didn't notice any of that, you know, because he was sitting there with his ears closed all the time.
Never heard that.
So he went for 20 years. He got married in the church, a Marxist church, but he didn't absorb any of the values of that and didn't notice any of the radicalism.
When we did the Ramsey story, I got to know Don Imus. I don't know Don Imus, but I got to know him. And when he made that remark, the remark was made on his radio show about the basketball players.
Oh, yeah, I remember the controversy, yeah.
And Obama at the time was a U.S. Senator and stands up, I believe in the well of the Senate, and says he didn't want his little girls to hear that, or in words to that effect, which I thought was interesting because at the time those kids were little kids. I mean, they were like, I don't know, 5 and 9 or something. And I thought, well, if you have your 5 and 9-year-old kids listening to Imus, you got a problem. But number two, every Sunday they went and listened to Reverend Wright.
Yeah.
That was okay. But Imus needed to be taken off the air. That was Barack Obama.
Because Reverend Wright's racism was black racism, and his politics were Marxist, and his ideology was Christian liberation theology. So that was all right. That was perfectly okay to expose his little girls to that.
Yeah, perfect, yeah.
You know, and so that shows a lot about the character of Obama.
Let me do this. I need to pause, and we will get our phone lines open. Give me another 20 minutes with Trevor. Then I'll open the phone lines up, 303-696-1971. This is Trevor Loudon. He's a New Zealander. I met him. I've talked to him many times. I met him a year ago. He's in town, and we'll talk about all of that. You can ask him whatever you'd like. This is what I'm going to ask when we come back. Who is Barack Obama? And, you know, I know that, and I want to also bring up another issue about I'd like to propose to put together in this country a symposium, if you would, like they do in academia, where we gather the Jerry Corsey's and you and all of these people, we gather together. And I was thinking, well, if we could get Donald Trump to underwrite it, but where we could all, and then present a paper.
Yeah, that would be a great idea.
Let me do this. It's 19 after the hour 6, 6:19. As 50 will be the high today, 65 on Thursday. And this is my question. And every time I ask it of people I respect, I'm not trying to give you a hand up here, but everybody, they go, I don't know. So we'll come back with Trevor right after this on 710 KNUS. Trevor Loudon is here. He's a Kiwi, as they say. He's from New Zealand. And he, with so many people that I so admire, doing so much great work, but in trying to look at the life of Barack Obama. And so I ask you this question. And I just asked it 2 weeks ago. There's a really interesting woman. She's a PI, lives in Ohio. She's moving some lawsuits ahead on Barack Obama using a Social Security number that really doesn't belong to him. Having said that, here's the $64,000 question. Who's Barack Obama? Look, I'd like Mike, come on, please. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Look, I have to answer that as most of the people do. I don't know.
Oh.
All I know is, all I can prove for sure is he's been mentored and guided by hardcore communists, anti-American Islamic radicals, and people who despise the United States Constitution his entire life. From Frank Marshall Davis as a young man to the pro-Soviet communists like Alice Palmer and Quentin Young in Chicago, the Durham brothers. He has been working with radicals his entire life, and they have built him up. You know, from the Communist Party USA, Democratic Socialists of America, all these Marxist groups. So he's a man of mystery. There's a whole bunch of gaps in his career, but one thing that can be verified for sure is the Marxist movement, the communist movement in this country, and people with many foreign ties have worked to promote this man right from the earliest days to the position of power that he's in now.
Do you believe that he knows his own life story?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I'm sure that he knows a large part of it, but even he may not understand the full significance of some of the things that have happened to him. It's pretty clear he's been guided right from the cradle, pretty much, to achieve some position of power.
His mother is a really interesting person. I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that Frank Marshall Davis took nude photos of his mother when she was maybe not 18 yet.
Yeah, look, I don't know for sure. There was some controversy about that, and that I know that Joel Gilbert has put those on his DVD. I have seen evidence that those photographs were taken from a girly magazine, and the dates don't match. So I just don't know. You know, Frank Marshall Davis was certainly a sexual libertine. He was a swinger. He was involved in all sorts of.
He took pictures too.
Oh, he certainly was a photographer. So I can't discount it, but I just can't confirm it. But I do know that he was.
Do you think she knew him?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Of course she knew him, because he was very close friends with her father.
Mm-hmm.
He was part of their family circle. She would have known him for sure.
All right. Having said that, when Obama, as a young boy, is sent back by his mother to, as they say, to Hawaii, to the Rock, why would Toot, as that's what he called, or Gramps rather, why would Stan take him to Frank Marshall Davis? And what are the odds of Frank Marshall Davis, looking at the pictures, is his biological father?
Well, again, I wasn't there at the time, so I can't.
No, I'm asking believe questions.
Look, I think that the father was the Kenyan guy. I think Frank Marshall Davis was very intimately involved with the family. The reason we're given is that the young Obama needed a black mentor, someone to guide him through, because he was a young black guy in Hawaii. There weren't many black people around, so that the grandfather chose his good friend Frank Marshall Davis to be Obama's mentor. But he would have known the grandfather used to smoke dope and drink whiskey with Frank Marshall Davis. The young man was there when they were telling all sorts of dirty jokes and whatever. So that part of the culture we know about. But I think it was more than that. I think that Frank Marshall Davis was also chosen as his political mentor as well. You know, the man was a leading member of the Communist Party. Mm-hmm. He was well known for that. He had run a brothel in Hawaii. So you know, to mentor the future president of the United States, you get a card-carrying communist who's on the FBI security index, meaning he would have been arrested if war had ever broken out with the Soviet Union. He was known to have run brothels. He was a sexual libertine, a pornographer, and a pornographer. So this is the kind of guy you would choose to mentor your grandson.
Well, but that's what leads everyone back to the photos. And again, I'm like you. I don't know. I wasn't there. But Joel, and he'd be one of the people I'd love to invite to a symposium or to a seminar. And Joel went to that house and matched up the floorboards.
Yeah.
And he said, look at the wood that she's kneeling on. Look at the wood that's here. Look at I think they call it the cove or something, where the floor meets the wall. I mean, all those things matched up. And he said, that's her and that's him. Now, I'm like you. I've seen both sides of this. I'm weighted more to it was her. But what then of course the next question is, then what does that mean? I don't know.
Yeah, well, look, I only say what I can prove.
No, I'm with you.
And there's some pretty shocking evidence there, and Joel has done a great job in researching. He was the one who discovered Frank Marshall Davis's brothel keeping. He was the one who interviewed Hawaii cops about Frank Marshall Davis. He did a great amount of research. I reserve my judgment on the photo issue because there is some counter evidence there. So I don't know. But what it is certain that young Obama was brought up, and hardly it was not exactly a Midwestern family tradition. You know, it was his maternal grandfather was a dope smoking leftist, you know, with ties with whose best friend was a Communist Party member, a brothel keeper, and a pornographer. You know, they used to take the young Obama down to the red light district of Honolulu and take him to the bars and that sort of thing. So this is not really the kind of environment where you grow up with wholesome American values, I would have thought.
All right, so who is Barack Obama?
Well, I can only speculate. All I can say is he has been brought up by the hard left, by anti-American elements his entire life, and deliberately promoted to a position of high authority. So the question is, how deep do those ties go? Is it just American Marxists who are doing this? We know there was some Saudi ties, you know, that helped him get him through college. We know he's worked with pro-Palestinian radicals. We know that he's worked with pro-Soviet communists like Alice Palmer and Quentin Young. So really he's a product of an anti-American alliance, and that is both foreign and domestic.
Have you seen these recent stories about his brother, his half-brother, who was his best man?
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, I know that he's got ties to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt.
There's pictures of him.
Yeah, so his half-brother has got ties to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, which is about as radical as you can get, you know. And we've got to remember that and this is the old Muslim communist tie-up. You know, a lot of people understand that revolution in Egypt was promoted largely by the Muslim Brotherhood, but it was also heavily promoted by the Egyptian Communist Party and the Trotskyist elements there. So it's this old anti-American alliance again, and Obama's half-brother was heavily involved in this.
His name is Malik.
Yeah, Malik. And so Obama is sending American resources to promote this anti-American revolution in Egypt.
There's a picture, and we've had it up. We can put it up again. And he's with members of PLO, and he's in garb, as they say, and around his neck he's wearing a scarf. And the scarf is it says from the river to the sea, in essence, Israel will be removed.
So this is Malik you're talking about?
Malik.
Yeah, yeah.
And he is also the head of the Barack H. Obama Foundation, a tax-exempt organization in Washington, D.C., heavily funded by the Hollywood left and by the American left. And they fund this organization. And with that money, according to a number of people that I listen to, they're building mosques with that money that's been given to them. And it's always this really interesting part is a lot of the left, it happens to be Jewish. The Jewish people are giving money to the Malik. No, you're laughing, but they're building mosques with it. Its intent purpose is to destroy.
Look, the Jews might as well be funding the Nazi Party if they're going to do that kind of thing, because there's a growing tide of anti-Semitism in the Middle East and in Europe itself, all promoted by the left and radical Islam. The two are working together. You have Jewish people in this country who are funding this.
Oh, I understand.
How suicidal can you get?
I agree. Where do you think the left picks up its anti-Semitism? Is it because of in this country, when people talk about anti-Semitism, they're principally talking about Jews. In the world, they're principally anti-Zionist or anti the state of Israel, or in the world of Islam, although they're Semites, they are also principally anti-Jewish. Where does this come from?
Well, look, it's got old roots. It goes back into Europe, and there's been pogroms against the Jews since the Middle Ages. Right. And then in the Middle East, the same. It's just a gut hatred of the Jewish people because they're a rival religion. Mm-hmm. They occupied the Holy Land, etc. But the left has fanned this, and particularly since the 1940s, because Israel was set up as a largely secular and socialist state, and in the early days it was allied to the Soviet Union. It was basically a Russian client state. But in the 1950s, the Israel threw off the Russians. They basically threw the Russians out and moved towards supporting America. So that was the Russians never forgave them for that. In Ion Pachepa's latest book, Ion Pachepa was a former head of the Romanian KGB. He was one of the very top senior defectors from the Eastern Bloc. He writes in his new book, Disinformation, that he was present at meetings with Andropov, the head of the KGB, who later became the leader of Russia for a short time, when they sent 4,000 agents into the Arab world, 4,000 Soviet agents armed with the learned protocols of the Elders of Zion, an old anti-Semitic forgery, to stir up hatred against Israel and the United States. And the meme was going to be that America is run by Jewish Zionists, and there are two Satans. There's a little Satan in Israel backed up by the big Satan in America. They're all run by the Jews. So therefore we have to take the Jews out, we have to take Israel out, and we have to take America out. And so the Soviets basically used this old anti-Semitism that already existed in the Middle East.
It's still the number one bestseller, I believe, in the Middle East, is the Protocols.
Oh, look, it's huge. And Hitler was a huge user of the Protocols.
Absolutely.
He used the Protocols to justify the extermination of the Jewish people in his country. So this is a very dangerous trend.
Timothy McVeigh traveled from gun show to gun show. Yeah. He lived off of selling two books. One was the Turner Diaries. And the other one was the Protocols.
Look, I didn't actually know that. Yeah. And it's interesting that there's strong evidence that McVeigh was backed by certain Iraqi elements.
Strange story. Into that LMA city, and who knows there was a fellow here in town by the name of Kevin Flynn, and Kevin is no longer in the business, was a newspaper man, Goodwin. And Kevin had that story down. He said, I'll tell you what. He said there were so many unanswered questions about, who was funding McVeigh, who was taking care of McVeigh.
Yeah, well, and Cliff Kincaid did a great amount of work on this too.
He did.
See, the thing is, what you've got is a situation. You've got the American identity movement, the sort of the anti-Semitic movement in America, who has been linked up with the leftist regimes of the Middle East, united by a common thing, their anti-Semitism. And so, McVeigh fit right into that profile.
He did.
And interestingly, like Bill Clinton owed his election to McVeigh. But McVeigh doing that Oklahoma City atrocity basically gave Bill Clinton the impetus needed to win that second presidency. So you have all these machinations going on behind the scenes. McVeigh did not act alone. There's no.
Well, he had Terry Nichols with him.
But it was more than Terry Nichols. There was a network behind him, and some of that network went back to the Iraqis.
Hang on. I told you to like him. It's 20 minutes before the hour of 7 o'clock. This is Trevor Loudon, and you can read much of the work that this man has done. We're talking into the desk drawer where I stack all of the stuff up, and that's his best man, his half brother, and he is there supporting radical Islamic causes. Mic him up. Oh, come on. Let me see if I can find a mic switch here for you. Let's try that. How's that work?
Yeah, that's much better. Okay. Yeah, look, I heard a lot about Malik, but I didn't actually realize he's the best man at the wedding.
Yeah.
And, his ties have been very well documented as radical causes. You imagine if a Republican president had a half-brother who was involved with the Ku Klux Klan.
I brought up Neil Bush. Suppose Neil Bush shows up in Germany in a Waffen-SS uniform, and his arm around a couple of Neos, and that would be front page of the New York Times.
Forever.
And we put this picture up, and there is Malik Obama wearing the Hamas scarf in 2010. He's in Yemen, of all places. Now, it's like, this is why I think we need a symposium. Like when I had always believed things that had happened at Columbia, you said, no, they happened at Occidental. You didn't know about his brother. And this takes nothing away from either of us because we're both geeks about finding out the truth.
There's so many facets and it would be great to get all the people who've researched Obama for several years into one room to compare notes,
present papers,
and present papers exactly as you say, and try and get a real picture of where this guy is, who this guy is, and where he's come from, and who's put him there. Because there's so many elements. The only thing you can say for surety that all the elements who have worked to promote Obama together are anti-American. That's the thing they have in common.
Why won't, for instance, this picture is a classic example of here is Malik Obama he's meeting with Hamas, 2010. They're in Yemen. He's wearing the African garb. He's wearing the Hamas scarf that's death to Israel. Now, as I mentioned, if it was Neil Bush, it would be the lead story on the nightly news. It would be front page of the Washington Post, the New York Times. Why doesn't Barack Obama get that attention?
Well, Obama has been shielded by the media right from the word go. Now, you remember in 2008, the media went through Sarah Palin's underwear drawers. They went through her kids' Facebook pages. They looked at every aspect of her life. They went through her husband's membership of the Alaska Independence Party because America had a right to know because Sarah Palin might be in a position of authority. Mitt Romney, we heard stories about how he beat up some young gay kid when he was 17. They went through his life with a fine-tooth comb. But Obama, who's got more skeletons in his closet than an elephant's graveyard, he was off limits. He was off limits then, and he's off limits now.
I saw a quick drop. Who's the guy that made Wall Street? Who's the filmmaker that made Wall Street? And
Oliver Stone.
Oliver Stone.
Yeah.
And they asked him, because he did that movie W. And they said, are you going to do Barack Obama's life? He said, Barack Obama's life is just not that interesting. I swear to God, I saw the cut. See if you can find that case. See if you can find, we have our computer's down, I apologize. But he said, they asked him and about Oliver Stone. Well, you did W. Are you going to do Obama? And he said, his life's just not that interesting. I'm sitting on the couch and I said, not that interesting. It's a spy novel.
Exactly. He could make a whole series of movies about it. But that's the whole point. 80% of journalists in this country self-identify as liberals. So they wanted, a large amount of the media in this country wanted Obama to get into power because he was their liberals' wet dream, basically. Had everything going for them. And now, even though a lot of them are having second thoughts, then they've got the embarrassment of saying,
because
well,
they did not.
Why did we not do it before?
Exactly.
So they've just got to keep on covering it up.
Exactly. All right. Here's what we have to do. We have to take a turnaround. Now we'll begin with phone calls, and you can speak with Trevor. Trevor's been involved in this look, as you say, or others say, who is Barack Obama? And all of his work, or a lot of the links to his work, are up on our website, 710knus.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Wednesday morning, March the 5th, 2014, I'm Peter Boyles. 50 the high today, 65 Thursday. On Friday, it's 45 degrees. Investigative reporter Wright, as I mentioned when I was talking about his appearance, I said, put on your seatbelt because we're going to roll. Our guest in studio is Trevor Loudon. You can go to our website, 710knus.com, and read a lot of Trevor's work. We're principally focusing this morning, once again, on the life and times of the President of the United States, Barack Obama. Susan, you waited forever. Good morning. You're on the radio show, and thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. We know that the Muslim Brotherhood struck it rich when they got an Islamic Marxist anti-American president, that gives the green light to the Sharia takeover of our Western banks through Sharia finance. Will you tell us what the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is and what its implications are? It controls about 1.5 billion people, and we never hear about it.
Yeah, well, that's a good question, and you see this playing out right now with the Ukrainian situation. The Obama thing isn't just an interesting detective story. It has huge implications for the whole planet. You've got to people see that Obama is busily downgrading the military. The military and the U.S. military is talking about fighting a 1 or 2 front war. And people see that there's Russia out there, there's China out there, there's Iran, there's the communist countries of Latin America. What they don't realize is that, and in radical Islam, there's been a thing called the Shanghai Cooperation Shanghai Cooperation Organization set up in 2001, which is a military, political, and economic alliance between Russia and China. Iran is part of it. All the old Tajikistans and Kazakhstans, they're all involved, and they have alliances with several countries in Asia, plus a whole lot of the communist countries in Latin America. So America is facing a united front, If America gets into war, it won't be just with Russia or China, it'll be with the whole shebang. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is basically that. It's an anti-American alliance. And you see this playing out right now in the Ukraine. The Ukraine is trying to break away from Russian influence because they see that the Russians are trying to recreate the old Soviet empire. They need the Ukraine so they can dominate Europe. And China has come out publicly and said, we are backing Russia over this. So America is facing an alliance of Russia and China with Iran, with a whole bunch of other radical and communist countries around the world. And Obama is busily cutting your military just at the time you need it most. So this is a very big, very important issue.
And the Ukraine has about the same power of fracking that would take us away from the Middle East oil dependence that we have here in Colorado and across the country. So it's involved with the oil money. That's involved with funding the Sharia finance.
Yeah, and that's very interesting because you see there's a covert alliance between the Russians and the Saudis. The Russians and the Saudis work together. They're both major oil exporting powers, and they want to stop fracking. They want to stop the development of oil in the United States. They want to keep the West dependent on their energy supplies. So they are working together against the West right now. And you see this playing out in all sorts of ways. But, I think people need to focus on this Ukrainian thing because this is one of the huge battles for freedom of our time. If the Ukrainians can break away from Russia, that'll be a huge blow to the Russians. If the Russians take over the Ukraine fully and get them back under their control, that is their gateway to Europe. They will then use that in conjunction with Germany to dominate the entire European continent. And they will have a bigger empire than they've ever had.
Okay, and what pressure can we put on where to do this?
Well, you've had people like Ted Cruz who've come up and very, very openly backed the Ukrainians against the Russians. people need to support people like Ted Cruz who make a stand on this, because you're not going to get this out of Obama. He'll make a few mealy-mouthed statements, and he's sending John Kerry to sort things out. Well, what's Kerry going to do? Is he going to cut off Russia's ketchup supplies?
Yeah, right.
You know, what's he going to do?
All right. Thank you, ma'am. We're going to jump. One line's open. Now we go to Tim. Tim, you're on the radio show. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you? Yes, sir. I had just sent you an email, and I'd like to know what Mr. Loudon thinks of this video that was dropped February 25th, supposedly by British intelligence advisor Michael Shrimpton, who says that Obama was born in Kenya in 1960 and that the CIA did DNA testing on Obama, and that they claim that Stanley Ann isn't his mother.
Yeah, this is Peter. I've seen that. I have a take on that, Trevor, if you do.
Look, I don't know. I've got to say I haven't seen it, and I really can't comment on it. I'm embarrassed to say so, but I have not seen that piece of information.
This, Peter, what I believe, and I saw that as well, it's like right now anywhere you can go on the Internet, you'll see this student ID card that says Columbia University foreign student. I don't know if you've seen that ID card.
Yes, sir, I have.
That's a phony card.
Yes, sir.
You have to be careful because there's all kinds of stalking horses out there. What I believe, and again, because it's interesting talking to Trevor, there is a difference between belief and knowledge, and no one has knowledge of Barack Obama. I mean, everybody, you live with belief. And there are some things you can know. But by and large, I don't know if you believe this or not, Trevor, but I do, that we principally live with belief.
Yeah, we do, and we tend to have beliefs, then find evidence to support those beliefs. That's human nature. But I'll just comment, there's a lot of things going around, because I think Obama's got such a murky story that I think that the Obama people put out that fake birth certificate knowing it was fake, and they knew it would draw a whole lot of people into investigating this red herring, you know.
Sure.
And it was, look, even if Obama had a genuine birth certificate, I think he would have put out a fake one just to cause problems and divert people's attention. And so there's a lot of stuff out there that's designed to muddy the waters and to discredit any genuine attempts to find out about the guy.
The term, and I'm sure everyone's familiar with it, is called agents provocateurs.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And there's so much being pushed out by pro-Obama people, and what they want you to do, and I'm saying this to you, Tim, what they want you to do, it's a bear trap. They want you to step into it and say, oh, here's the proof, and then they prove that what they put out there is manufactured in a lie to make you look bad. And I've received hundreds and hundreds of emails with the student ID card from Columbia, and every time I say this is fake, and people send me emails that they're mad at me or that they're covering up, and I said, don't you understand, the moment that someone like myself or Trevor or Joel Gilbert or Jerry Corsi get on a list of people, Jack Cashill, and they say, here's the real card. And then they're jumping out of the bushes going, fake, and we caught you.
Yeah.
First of all, I'd just like to thank both of you for your opinion and all your hard work, and I think there are several Americans, much like myself, that are just hanging on word for Lieutenant Zullo to be announced supposedly at the end of March. Thank you very much for taking my call.
Just so you know, we were talking about that off the air. No one knows what's going to be said, and Trevor, do you mind talking about, you were just with those guys?
No, I was with people closely associated with them. I just did a tour of Arizona, and I spoke at the Western Conservative Conference down there, and I met people who are very closely associated with Sheriff Joe's work, and I pumped them and pumped them and pumped them to try and get as much as I could, but they were very, very close-lipped. So I can speculate what they may have, but I honestly don't know.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. We go here. There's two lines open, 303-696-1971. Hey, Rob, you're on 710 KNUS. Our guest is Trevor Loudon. Good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Hey,
thanks for the hard work on this. Just a quick question. I was curious if either one of you happened to catch an article in, I want to say January 24th on the American Thinker. And it was kind of an interesting bend on things. Possibly this guy's ties to an Indonesian Islamic-based cult called the Subud?
Yeah,
that's Subud.
Yeah,
Subud, yeah.
That's Loretta Fuddy's group.
Right.
Yeah.
But this article on the Thinker had some really interesting ties that, like the I guess the main hub of.
Well, did you ever see the picture? You ever see the picture of the founder?
Yes.
He looks
and
like Barack Obama. He does. He looks just exactly like Barack Obama.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that really kind of caught my eye. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. This is looking into a mirror.
Here's the story, and I'm sure that once again that Trevor knows it, probably knows it better. Loretta Fuddy was the woman who allegedly gave what I call the phony PDF file, and to the woman who comes from the Obama's private law firm. And my contention is the kid that I call Jimmy down the hall invented or made the birth certificate. Now, because I had to go out and get my work folder, there's so many holes in the so-called certificate of live birth that woman brought to the White House for Obama to drop that. But
all 28 layers.
Yeah, and indeed. But Loretta Fuddy is now dead, died in a plane crash. But it turns out she was very much involved in this Islamic cult that had its headquarters in Indonesia about the same time. Now, it doesn't mean anything, but it's a conversation. But at the same time, and they brushed up against, there's no question, they brushed up against Stanley Ann Dunham when she was there.
Yeah, look, the Subud organization was very popular amongst Western liberals in the 60s. It was and you can imagine that Stanley Ann Dunham would have been at least interested in Subud when she was in Indonesia at the time. It'd be a very natural fit. So it is a very intriguing connection.
And then suddenly she's the only one in the plane crash that dies.
Well, and then the fact that the U.S. hub for this Subud is
Seattle,
Chicago.
Washington. No, Seattle.
Oh, really?
Yep, Seattle.
Okay. I recall seeing that it had really strong ties to Chicago, but then again, didn't little Miss Stanley Ann take a hike up to Seattle?
Well, she went to Seattle. I mean, in spite of the Obama telling that story to those kids a few years ago, less than 2 years ago, that he went to the airport with his mother to say goodbye to his father, who was off to Harvard. Well, what we know by paper trail and by truth is that this little fellow's about 10 days of age, give or take, and Stanley Ann leaves to go back to the mainland, to Seattle, to go to school. The records are there, the tuition records. People have interviewed the babysitters, seen the rent payment checks. And what's interesting is who pays for all of this. I mean, it still comes back to Stan Dunham works in a furniture store, and Toot works in a bank.
Yeah. And
they're not wealthy people, are they, by any stretch?
Well, there's no evidence that they're wealthy people, but they could still send their boy to a private school.
Well said. You know. But it would depend on who he said he was.
Yeah.
I mean, if he arrives to go to Punahou, I think it's pronounced, which is like, it's like Grayland Country Day. Maybe that's a good way to describe it. And he gets into that school. Does he get into it because he is, quote, a politically correct?
Yeah, was he given some sort of scholarship because of his ethnicity or his supposed background or whatever?
Or claimed ethnicity.
Yeah. You know, it's another one of those unanswered questions, isn't it?
And then this really strange name that turns up, I believe it's pronounced Sirabaka. And it looks like his mother is putting that on a passport. And does that tie back into the cult that Fuddy was involved in, where they changed their names? Now, I don't know any of this, but I do know that those things happened. That's the MacGuffin, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Yeah, well, you don't. And look, they're going to be debating Obama's background for decades after he leaves office. Also, they'll be holding academic conferences about this because this is the great scam of the 20th century.
Well, again, you and I spoke more about it off the air than we did on the air. I mean,
21st century, I should say.
But to have a symposium, a gathering like they do in the academy, or as they do in medicine, as they do in astrophysics, they do it, and they bring the great minds together. Not that I'm a great mind, and they say, "Well, gee, what is it that we know?"
Because it has to be done. You know, this is the leader of the free world we're talking about.
Oh, yeah.
Someone who's presiding over the demise of America. Someone who's done huge damage to the American economy, done huge damage to the American military, and America's standing abroad. And there has got to be reasons why he's doing this, and there may be clues to those reasons and discovering more about his background.
You believe he's doing this with intent?
Look, absolutely.
All right.
You know, he is... The main goal of Obama is to destroy American sovereignty, and he's doing that by destroying the American military. He's done more damage to your U.S. military than most armies could ever contemplate. And he's doing it when Russia and China are both getting more and more belligerent and more aggressive and building up, and Iran is doing the same thing, and this is the time Obama thinks you need to cut your nuclear arsenal down to 265 nukes. When the Russians alone have more than 6,000. That's why Obama can't do anything over the Ukraine, because America's just not prepared to fight.
Hey, Mike, you're on the radio show. Our special guest is Trevor Loudon in studio. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. This is fascinating stuff. I understand that there's another half-brother in China who's a nuclear consultant.
Yeah.
As far as I know, he's given only one Western interview, and he apparently doesn't want anything to do with the rest of the family. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Look, I know about that, but I don't know any more than what has just been put into the news media. But, you know, the fact that he's working for the Chinese in that field, you don't get to do that. You don't get to work in China and in the nuclear field unless you're a trusted individual, unless you come from a family that's got a history that can be verified. So that, you know, you got one half brothers involved with the radical Islam. They don't trust people either that they can't vet. You got another half brother who's working for the Chinese communists in the nuclear field. They don't trust people they can't vet. So they vet their people. It's just unfortunate that America doesn't vet the other half brother.
Let me come back, Mike. This Peter, if I may.
Yeah.
When did you begin to have serious questions about who this man is?
I'm a political junkie. I knew in 2007 when he was running for president, this guy was bad. I knew it from my sources and things that I've read. And it's just my heart just sank when he was elected the first time, and then of course it was a double whammy when he was reelected.
Do you have any idea who he is?
I suspect he's Barry Soetoro. He's the adopted son of Lolo Soetoro, and the mother, because he was becoming too successful with an Indonesian American oil firm. She didn't want little Barry coming under the evil influence of capitalism and trucked him off to Hawaii to be mentored by his grandparents, who in turn turned him over to Frank Marshall Davis. As far as his university creds, that's a real dark hole. I mean, they're so locked up, nobody can get to see them.
But what would be the reason? And Trevor and I were talking about this on air and off air. And my contention is not necessarily because of grades. Now, we know, for instance, Hillary Clinton's thesis has been deep sixed for the things that she said. And they never want. This is a very radical period for American college students, and a lot of people did not want you to see what Mrs. Clinton thought about America at the time she was Hillary Rodham.
Right.
I think in this case, and turn it over to Trevor, so many different stories have been told, and it's extremely opportunistic, it's extremely pragmatic, that he is chameleon-esque, that he knows what to say, when to say it, and this isn't what's being said about him when he's 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 or 13 by Toot, Gramps, by Stanley Ann, by, whomever, fill in the blank, Frank Marshall Davis. It doesn't matter. Maybe Lolo says things to, we know that Lolo enrolled him in the Indonesian schools, pronounced him a Muslim because you had to be, although he didn't go to Madras, but he did go to an Islamic school.
Right.
And so did he learn at a very young age to say things to get a door open, and then as he becomes, as they say in the law, in his majority, passes 18 or he passes 21, does he learn to continue to say those things? For instance, I'm a foreign student. I'm a foreign national. I'm this, I'm that, and that way he gains entrance into places that normally, just as as a black kid with a C average, he wouldn't have gotten.
Look,
of course. And then when you couple that with the soft-headed liberal academia, who probably gave him a pass all along the way everywhere he went, he gained entry everywhere.
Well, I think there's that. I think there's those elements, but I think it's also more sinister than that. I think there's foreign money that came in to back Obama, and he doesn't want that known. It's certainly Saudi money, but I think there was also people like Tom Ayers probably contributed.
Frank Marshall Davis was not a poor man.
No, and
George Soros.
Well, Soros is obviously involved in there too, but you've got to look at people like, and I look at the Soviet angle. People like Quentin Young and Alice Palmer, who worked very closely with him in Chicago. Alice Palmer was a Soviet agent.
And they were Stalinists.
She was Stalinist. She was she went to the Soviet bloc several times. She was a leader of the World Peace Council, one of the Soviet Union's main fronts, and she was also the North American head of the International Organization of Journalists, a bona fide Soviet front. She also had the Black Press Institute in Chicago, which was an organization of about 100 known American journalists, almost all black, almost all communists, who were spouting Soviet propaganda into the America's black population for several years. And this was the woman who basically got Obama's first job in politics. So you've got to look, there's all sorts of foreign ties there. And Obama's worked with pro-Soviet Marxists his entire life. And what does he do when he gets into power? He guts the American military, which the Soviets have always wanted. He has a meeting with the Russian president in South Korea. He's caught off mic saying to Dmitry Medvedev, "When I get re-elected, I'll have more flexibility to deal with you." "Yes," said Mr. Medvedev, "I understand. I'll pass your message on to Vladimir. We are with you." Now, how much more of a clue does America need, people?
I'm appalled at the ignorance of the American people, because every policy he has initiated has, in one way or another, been detrimental to the United States. And that can't be by accident.
That's the overriding thing, isn't it? Everything he does is to the detriment of the United States. You've got to nail it in one, yeah.
I'm going to break. Thank you.
Could he clarify, when you come back, could he clarify Malik? I know of the half-brother in Kenya, but is that Malik, or
That's
is there
Malik.
a third one?
Well, wait a minute. Malik lives in the U.S. and lives in the Middle East, and he's the head of the Barack H. Obama Foundation, the tax-free foundation in I believe their headquarters are either in Virginia or Maryland, but they operate out of Washington, D.C. He's also the guy that shows up in the picture with the PLO.
Okay.
All right.
So there are three of them.
There could be more.
There are several.
Yeah,
There's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, could be a lot. If you're just joining us, Trevor Loudon is here. He's been a guest on the show before, and we have entered into the realm of who is or what is Barack Obama. Again, we've been dancing around the question of a symposium, a seminar, and what do you think conclusions would be? Who would you like to see come to it? I would love to host it here in Denver. We're central part of the United States. It's expensive. A lot of the people that I know, that I respect, they're working people, working men and women, working investigators, and to come to town for, say, 3 days and stay in hotel rooms and pay for stuff. But the guy that we're trying to reach, and honestly, believe me, we're trying to reach him, is Donald Trump. He's got a huge wallet. He's been embarrassed by Obama for saying the no such thing as the birth certificate. And, of course, then this bizarre credential drops that his father's African. We've been over all the father's race is African. What do you think about something like that? And do you think it would get attention?
Oh, look, it absolutely would, and I think it's a very, very good idea. You'd want to get, obviously, Mike Zullo and Sheriff Joe's people involved. Oh, yeah. You'd want to get Jerome Corsi and Jack Cashel and Jerome Mr. Gilbert, Jared Gilbert. Joe Gilbert. Yeah, Joel Gilbert.
Yeah.
I just know a friend called Jared Gilbert, and I always confuse them. So, look, you'd need to get all of those people, but I'd also like to see some FBI people there, some CIA people. I'd like to see, because I know there's a lot of people out there who know stuff, who would come out of the woodwork if you actually had a forum for them to talk about. You know that if If Obama was out of power and, say, you had a real, genuine conservative government in Washington, all sorts of people would come out of the woodwork. They'd all come forward with information when they felt safe to do so. But they're not coming out now because they're too worried about the consequences. But I think you could still stage a symposium like you're suggesting and bring a lot of people together, and I think that would be extremely helpful.
What would happen if, hypothetically, it turns out that this is a fraud? What would happen to Obamacare? What would happen to all of these executive orders? What would happen to these? I mean, it's just I ask myself this question. Suppose it blows up, and suppose, I don't know if it would affect eligibility, because if you believe that Frank Marshall Davis is the biological father and Stanley Ann's the mom, he's a natural-born citizen.
Yeah, there's no question. It's ironic, isn't it, that if his father was a communist, that would make him a legitimate president. Sure. So, look, the constitutionality aside, look, you're going to have a whole change in culture in Washington to even begin to undo the damage that Obama has done. And it's like the emperor's new clothes. There's been so many people who have bought into the Obama lies that for them to back down and to admit that they were fooled is a big ask for a lot of people. I think this mystery is going to unravel over a long period of time. I think it's going to be a long time before we know the real story behind Obama. But right now, see, part of the reason I'm going around is I've talked to more than 200 Tea Party groups around the country and a whole lot of conferences and that sort of thing. I'm here because I don't want to see the consequences of Obama's frauds affect America. I actually want to see him out of office and the party he represents out of office, because they have been taken over at the highest levels. It's not just Obama here. My latest book is The Enemies Within Communists, Socialists and Progressives in the U.S. Congress. So what I'm saying is the Marxists have taken over the leadership of the Democratic Party. So there's a whole bunch of people behind Obama that need to be looked at as well. So, look, to me, the future of America hangs in the balance right now. If we don't get these people out of office and investigate their backgrounds, America is in huge trouble. It's trouble that it may never recover from.
I told you this off the air, and it depends on whom I'm talking to, the answer. And this is not something that I want to see happen, but my beliefs tell me that I may have seen the last Republican president of my lifetime. Now, I'm not a kid anymore, but I may have seen my last Republican or conservative president. What are your thoughts?
Look, you get these Republicans in the Beltway. They think this is just politics as normal. Republican, Democrat, and they're just waiting for their turn. They don't understand that the Democrats, see, in 1995, the Marxists took over the AFL-CIO in this country. They took over the unions. That gave them control of the Democratic Party, and they purged all the moderates like Joe Lieberman, etc. So the Democrats are now a Marxist-led party. They're not going to ever let the Republicans get back in again if they have a choice. And what they're going to do, the big thing is the immigration issue. I agree. Because they want to get 20 million, whatever it is, illegal immigrants legalized. They're going to give them voting rights, and I quote them. I quote the leaders of this movement saying this is going to give them at least 8 million more Democratic Party votes. Sure. Texas will go blue. That will make it mathematic. If you add the Electoral College votes from Texas to those of California, which they've already got, it is mathematically impossible for the Republicans to ever win another presidential election. It'll be a one-party state led by the unions and the communists and the Democrats.
There will be, I believe there'll be red governors, red senators, red congresspeople, but
they'll be
by and large, I think for the Republican Party, the game's over.
Well, look, they will never ever hold office again if they get this immigration thing through. So it's so important that we do not allow that bill to go through.
But look at the Republicans, Trevor, right now, the so-called Republicans. We have a clash going on here for who's going to carry the banner for the Republicans to challenge John Hickenlooper for the governorship. Yeah. With the exception of one or two of these guys, and they're edging them out right now, these are, I use this too many times, but George Bush's single greatest regret. He didn't get citizenship. He didn't get the pathway to citizenship for, and I believe the number's probably closer to 40 million illegals in this country.
Yeah, look, and that's exactly right. You got these dumb GOPers like John Boehner and Eric Cantor and Marco Rubio and Lindsey Graham, who say this is going to be good for the Republican Party.
Nonsense.
Because they're all going to, if you give these people citizenship and voting rights, they're all going to be so grateful they'll start voting Republican.
Exactly.
Which is just delusional,
I agree.
We've got 2.5 years to save this country, because if the Democrats get back in again, they will legalize illegal immigrants. They will have the voting majority to keep them in power forever. And if you think the Democrats are arrogant now, you imagine what they'd be like with 8 million more votes at least in their pocket, the Republicans permanently out of office. This country won't be like France or Germany. It'll be like Venezuela very quickly and Cuba not long after, because that is the plan.
Do you believe, what is your greatest fears right now in watching this country step forward?
Well, my argument is this: the only chance that America has to save itself right now is for the real patriots to win the battle within the Republican Party. You've got to have the Ted Cruzes and the Mike Lees and the Rand Pauls and the Trey Gowdies. If they become ascendant and they can give you a Reagan-esque type of president, this country has a chance. But if the old guard, the Republican old guard, win out, they're going to lose the next election. The Democrats are going to consolidate power. They're going to get those 8 million more votes, and it's over. So I'm here to back the Tea Party. I'm here to back the patriots, the true conservatives who are trying to basically win the battle within the Republican Party. So the real future of America and the Western world, to be honest, depends on who wins out in the GOP. It comes down to that.
Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I know her. Look, I don't actually think she's going to run. That's my feeling. I think she's tired and old and haggard, and the Benghazi scandal is just too much. And I don't think she's going to run. I think the Democrats are going to go for a fresher face in 2016.
Who would it be?
I think Elizabeth Warren's definitely going to run.
There's one.
I think the governor of Maryland, is it I think he'll be another player. There may be someone else. Whoever it is going to be as bad as the current one. There's not going to be any moderate or centrist Democrat come forward. It's going to be another hard leftist. So it's really academic, because the president, when you're in the Democrats, the president isn't really the boss anyway. It's a figurehead. Obama isn't the boss. He's just playing his role. And if Elizabeth Warren gets in, or anyone else, they'll be playing the same role, backed by Soros money, backed by
it's money. Parties are money.
Yeah, backed by the Institute for Policy Studies.
Sure.
The leftist agenda will roll on. So it'll be another Marxist. Elizabeth Warren is 100% Marxist.
What do you think they ultimately want?
Well, they want the big stumbling block to world socialism or world government is America, and particularly the American military, the American Constitution, and American exceptionalism. America is the big, if you talk to communists, people say, why do people support communism? They saw it fail in Eastern Europe and Russia. If you talk to American communists, they'll say, well, the only reason it failed in Russia and Eastern Europe is because America sabotaged it. Because America spent them into bankruptcy and sabotaged them and spied on them and whatever. So America has to be taken down. And the American military has to go. The Americans' right to keep and bear arms has to go. America has to become a little sovereign, a little part of the United Nations world empire. So Obama is doing everything he can to destroy the American economy and the American military, so you have no choice but to be incorporated into the United Nations, or if that fails, to be actually physically attacked by the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and all their allies. And, that's the other thing. America has been alienated from all its traditional allies, so when the big attack comes, you're going to have no friends to come to your aid at all. So it's America on its own.
Lines are back open again, 303-696-1971. Lines are wide open. You're listening to Trevor Loudon. We had everybody jammed up and people dropped off. And if you were catching a busy before and want to talk to Trevor, 303-696-1971. Again, this Saturday, March the 8th, he's speaking at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the Ministries of Life Church in Loveland. and he'll be speaking there at 2 o'clock, and if you'd like to come and see him, please do. Grant, we have full lines, great guests, running short on time, and I know we're getting back as soon as we can. Let's go here. We start on line 1, and this is Marvin. Please try and do it quick with full lines. You're on 710 KNUS. Special guest is Trevor Loudon. Good morning.
Pete, thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Trevor Loudon, you wonderful patriot, you.
Hi, Marvin. Thanks.
You deserve a special distinguished honor for being a patriot and fighting for us. And my quick comment is a lot of people worldwide are unaware how many worldwide liberty lovers look to the old American Constitution as a stalwart against this tyranny that's encroaching across the world. And I don't know if you care to speak to that, Loudon. And I'm sorry, sir. Are you from England? Where are you from, sir?
No, from New Zealand.
He's a Kiwi.
Look,
New Zealand. Oh, you're far removed from all that madness.
Yeah. Look, we're not really, but look, and that's it. You know, the American Constitution is the greatest political document ever written. It is truly an inspiration across the entire planet, and every freedom lover around the world is looking at what's happening in America right now and tearing their hair out because you've got this great document that's being trashed. And we understand that if you can recover from this and turn things around and restore your Constitution to its rightful place, that's going to inspire freedom movements all over this planet. There are people watching what's happening in America right now. You know, the fate of freedom across the whole world is coming down to what happens in America. If you lose your Constitution, the whole Western world goes down. If you restore your Constitution, that's going to inspire liberty movements across the planet.
I'm afraid the Constitution's on the way out. We have so many people who have been dumbed down, propagandized, and turned into sheeple. It's going to be a mad dash.
Here we go. I'm going to apologize, Marvin. I'm going to jump. Right. We go to David. David, you're on the radio show. Good morning. Thank you.
Hi, David.
Yeah, good morning, Peter. Listen, have you found any connections to various presidents of major corporations in America that are linked with communist organizations, etc.?
Well, it goes back to Arm & Hammer, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, look, Arm & Hammer was a Soviet agent. He set up Occidental Petroleum, etc.
No, I know about Arm & Hammer. There was someone that just recently gave, or within the last 1 or 2 elections, that gave millions of dollars to Obama, and he's the president of a major corporation.
You're talking about I think it's General Electric, wasn't it?
I think it's GE, and in turn, Obama gives them billions of dollars in taxes.
Yeah, well, it's the old crony capitalism. Yeah, it's basically fascism.
Thank you. Let me hold a second, please.
Comment on the CIA.
David, can you hold on? I have been saying that for the longest time on this show, that it's a fascist relationship, banking and the government, banking and corporates. And and the definition of fascism is a corporate state. Mm-hmm. And people kick the term fascism around that don't understand what fascism is. But that truly is a fascist model, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a Mussolini model. It's big,
absolutely
big government, big unions, big corporations.
Absolutely.
And the small guy, the middle class, is nothing.
Yeah.
Okay,
right, continue.
Real quick. Comment on the head of the CIA, and Valerie Jarrett gets 4 or 5 secret agents, Secret Service agents, wherever she goes.
Yeah, well,
are you aware of that?
She's Obama's handler. She's the most powerful woman in America.
Yeah.
Look, I can't comment on the current head of the CIA. The last head, Leon Panetta, had a long-term Marxist pedigree, and was connected. He was the best friends of a man called Hugh DeLacy, a secret communist, who actually happened to work with Frank Marshall Davis in the old days as well. So look, this is not a new phenomenon. There's been a plan to take down America for a very long time.
Let me do this. I'm going to take one more call because of time. Let's go here. This is Louie. Louie, you're on the radio show. We got about 3 minutes. Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Peter, and good morning,
Trevor.
Mr. Loughlin. I really applaud your efforts and what you're saying, and I truly believe that America is going downhill, and it will continue to do so. I want to know from you, what is the most important thing that we as patriots and Americans can do to save our Constitution?
Look, I think the only chance you've got left right now is to win the battle within the GOP. I think you've got to do what they did with Reagan in 1980. In 76, the Republican old guard opposed Reagan. They hated his guts.
Sure did.
But the people bypassed that. They got behind Reagan in 1980, and they ignored the GOP old guard, and they got their candidate. And Reagan did a lot to arrest the decline of America. Right now, this country needs another Reagan And the only way you're going to do that is for the grassroots to take over that GOP and make sure the GOP does not give you a Jeb Bush or someone like that, but gives you more of a Ted Cruz or a Rand Paul or a Mike Lee, someone who actually can take this country back. And that person needs to get a whole team around them, a whole bunch of, Sarah Palin for Secretary of Energy and John Bolton for Secretary of State and Alan West on his VP ticket.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to see people have to get
West.
active.
That'd be interesting to see West arrive as a VP. That would be interesting.
That would be great, and people have to get rid of the Republican old guard and get the patriots into positions of power, and then America has a last chance at liberty.
I apologize. We're on time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louis.
Thank you for your time.
Again, real quick, give the website if you would, and we'll hook it up to ours. And our guest is going to be this coming Saturday, 2 p.m. in Loveland at the Ministries of Life Church. Website is, your website, if you would, please.
TrevorLoudon.com.
Yeah.
So that's my daily blog, and Loudon is just Loudon.
And if you go to our website, 710knus.com, we link to everything.
Yeah.
So the 2 hours went too quick.
Look, it was great, Peter, and I just love being asked the questions that count.
Yeah.
Because there's so much glib rubbish in the media, and it's so refreshing to actually talk to someone who cares and has done the background research.
Oh, you're kind.
Yeah.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.